Welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to be joined by my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Pooja Agarwal. Pooja, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for everyone?
Hi, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here. My name is Dr. Pooja Agarwal. I am a cognitive scientist. I've been conducting research on how students learn for 15 years with Dr. Nebel, and I have also been teaching. I started my career in elementary education, and now I am a college professor in Boston. And so I love being able to combine the science of learning and teaching with learning and teaching in the classroom.
And you've done quite a bit of that over your career. Yeah. So I think your sort of career trajectory has been really interesting. It's always been kind of education, science of learning focused, but you've done that in lots of different directions. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that?
To put it into a little bit of context, in college, I was really interested in getting certified in elementary education. And I was taking all of these certification classes and gen eds and methods classes. And I realized that as engaging and fun as they were, a lot of the basis for those classes was just kind of, this is how I taught, therefore this is how you should teach. And it just didn't really feel as rigorous as I had expected. And simultaneously, on the other side of campus at Washington University in St. Louis, I was taking these really neat psychology classes, like cognitive psychology. And we were learning about the science of learning, but it was so laboratory based on the order of looking at research on how people remember words and letters. And so on one side of campus, we're learning about real life learning, but without research. And then on the other side of campus, I'm learning about research with very little real world application. And so for me, I had one of those light bulb moments in college, and I really wanted to combine the two. So in terms of my career path, I got certified in elementary ed. I did research in classrooms for 10 years. I did some policy work at the state level and at the US Department of Education. I do a lot of science communication. And in my head, they all sort of fit together, even though they also seem like very distinct careers. I've written a book as well for teachers, and it's fun for me to be able to explore what this science of learning is and how we can approach that change from multiple different paths and avenues, as opposed to just being siloed in teaching or in research. So it seems a little zigzagged as a career path, but it's also just so rewarding to be able to combine it all together.
Yeah, I think it gives you such an interesting perspective and lens. I know when I'm talking to students a lot about applying some of the science of learning stuff in their own classrooms, sometimes there's a little pushback because there's lots of just systemic things and things that I'm not always that aware of because I don't necessarily see things from an administrator point of view or yeah, from the public education system point of view. So I think it's really cool that you have experience in lots of different areas all related to education that allows you to think about that.
One way I also think about it is sort of like a doctor who sees patients and talks about medicine versus a doctor who talks about medicine but doesn't see patients at all. And so I feel like it's so key to talk about education, but to also still be in the classroom with students. I still grade on a weekly basis and I interact with my college students, and that provides that kind of rich, rounded experience that you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think we both just got done with a ton of grading, so
Yeah.
exactly. So you're involved in a whole lot of science communication stuff, and I am too. And there are some things about that I find so rewarding. It's why I do the work, right? And then other things that are so challenging in that space. So I wonder if you could just talk about your own experience with both of those, like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like what you love about it, and what's a little bit more challenging?
Well, like you said, the science communication piece is so rewarding. And it's really fulfilling to take that basic laboratory research that you and I have conducted, to take that teaching in the classroom and to share what that means on a very practical level. So it's really fulfilling and rewarding to say, here is one thing you can do in your classroom to improve learning, and it's based on research. And with science communication, bridging that gap is why we need that communication. It's been really hard for scientists to talk with practitioners and to get in touch with kind of the real world of learning. And it's hard for teachers to access that research. It's stuck in academic journals, it's full of jargon and statistics. And so for you and me, whether it's on social media or our websites or our books or op-eds or articles in the media, there's so much wonder and fun in thinking about how do I take these complex research-based ideas and make them practical on a daily basis. So I would say that's the good, fun part. I don't know about the ugly part, but
yeah, maybe ugly is not the right word.
Yeah. I think the challenges of science communication for me personally is really understanding not only if that communication is having an impact, but how to make the most impact. So sometimes it feels like a tweet makes a lot of impact. And then sometimes Twitter just feels like things go into a black hole or a void. Or writing a book, my book, Powerful Teaching, has a lot of impact. But then sometimes I feel like I'm saying the same things, honestly, that are just in the book. And so navigating how do we make that change and which avenues are the most impactful is something I'm still really wrestling with science communication. What can I do? How can I shift teaching to being research-based teaching, but still figuring out, is there one right way to make change? And I've settled on there isn't one right way, but it's still a big challenge in science communication is I want to make a big impact and share this research and the science of learning, but how I do that is still constantly evolving.
Yeah, I find myself kind of wrestling with the idea that I'm mostly speaking to individual educators who are interested, right? They're like seeking out the science of learning, and then I'm happy to share and to translate that, but that only goes so far. So how do we make a bigger splash, a bigger impact in the world? Yeah. Cool. So kind of related to that, translating, I find that a lot of the stuff we talk about isn't just applicable to classrooms, right? That there's broad applications that, I mean, you can use some of this stuff just in your everyday life to make things better. But so much of our research does take place in the lab with undergraduates, or we have a decent amount of applied research now, but most of it is in classrooms with a lot of times younger students. What do you think about the degree to which we can actually take that research and apply it in the business world or apply it in everyday life? Like, what do you think about that?
I love being able to think about that and talk about it, just like we were saying, taking this research and making it applicable in everyday life. You're right, a lot of the research has been done in labs, but more recently in classrooms. So my colleagues and I recently published a review of the literature looking at retrieval practice research, pulling information out of your head to improve your learning, and that research in authentic classrooms. Now, that research, we looked at 50 experiments from around the world, and we, of those 50 experiments, participants ranged from elementary school through K-12, high school, college, all the way up to graduate school and medical education. And we found in that review of the literature that retrieval practice works. It improves students' long-term learning, whether they are 8 years old or they are 28 years old. So in that way, it's very exciting to know that there's this robust, reliable strategy of retrieval practice to improve learning for a wide range of students. Now, when it comes to everyday life, one thing I like to point out is that we already use retrieval practice on a daily basis. So whether it's trying to remember our grocery lists, whether it is listening to a podcast recently and then wanting to tell a friend, oh, I heard on this podcast this really cool thing about watermelons, or this really cool thing about bumblebees, right? That's retrieving. That's just pulling out information we read or we listened to and sharing it with someone else. So we already use retrieval practice in everyday life. There isn't much research looking at retrieval practice in everyday life. So that would be fun to develop partnerships to be able to do that. So for example, what would retrieval practice look like in a business setting or at a tech company or at a healthcare firm or at a law firm? And we don't have that research yet. At the same time, we also know that retrieval practice improves students with improves learning for students with learning disabilities, for people with traumatic brain injury, for people of all ages, for all kinds of different content areas, whether it's math, science, reading, etc. And another way to think about it in the real world is how often we go through training. So even as a faculty member, we start our new hires, the onboarding, with training to use software systems. And if in business settings, for example, people practice retrieving what they've learned in that training, we don't have to constantly onboard people over and over again. That's a waste of time and a waste of money. And I'll give an example. I was talking with a company about retrieval when people are being trained on processing purchasing orders. It's a very simple example, processing purchase orders, and people learn how to use that software. But then when you don't need to do that for a while, and then you come back to that software, it's kind of like oh crap, I did that training 6 months ago. Now I actually have to use it. Imagine if that training included having to use those concepts, having to retrieve them. Then we don't have to waste all this time with employees, with staff, reiterating, reviewing in the same way that teachers do. So I do think there's a lot of application in the real world. And I agree that we do need more research in those areas outside of education as well.
Yeah, so I think you probably agree with me. I feel like I can say it probably works, but I can't say it definitively because we don't have the research. I think that's a fair answer.
I would say actually it does work. We just need a little more, or we need research to verify that. But we do know retrieval works in everyday life, telling stories, talking about our favorite vacation. It would be nice to have more research to back that up.
Yeah, I like that. That's stronger. That's good. Okay, so we're just about out of time. So I'm going to leave with one more thing, and that is you are arguably one of the top experts on retrieval practice in the world right now. If somebody wanted to apply retrieval practice tomorrow, so that is whether they're in education in a classroom, or maybe they are in, I don't know, corporate meetings and they need folks to remember what they learned in the meeting. What are some like quick tips, quick things that they could do that would have some big impact?
I would suggest one of the quickest ways to implement retrieval practice is to simply retrieve 2 things, to write down 2 things about anything you want to remember. So for my college students at the end of class, I have them write down 2 things they learned in class today, or I have them write down 2 things they remember from class last week. In everyday life, in terms of what can you do tomorrow, I like to retrieve 2 things about a book I'm reading. What are 2 things that are important to me, or 2 things I want to remember? Even right now, I've been recently indulging in binge watching Spanish TV shows on Netflix. So I've been watching a show called Velvet. And if I want to remember something about the plot from Velvet, I could just share 2 things with you, Dr. Nebel, and talk about it. Or if for some reason I wanted to remember it, I could write down 2 things I've learned, or maybe even 2 phrases in Spanish that I would like to remember. There's a lot of fun language learning when you watch foreign TV shows. And so maybe I just want to write down 2 really fun phrases or words that I picked up on. So we don't have to grade that for ourselves. We could keep a running Google Doc or a journal where we just write down 2 things about anything we want to remember. Another example is if you keep a daily journal, you could just write down 2 things from the day that were really cool. And just by writing down those two things, you're retrieving it, you're pulling that information out, and that's going to help you remember over the long term. So it doesn't even have to be two things you want to remember. Just what are two really cool things that happened that day, or two things you learned on a podcast. And that's sort of a personal memory, a personal retrieval boost for yourself that you can do tomorrow.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that. And I'm going to start doing that right now. Okay. No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me today, for doing this little interview. I appreciate it so much. It was fun to get to catch up with you a little bit. And I think we'll just stop there. So thank you.
Thank you.